Right, so Malcolm, we've had a very personal question today.
Mm-hmm.
Hi Malcolm, I would like you to do the message on panic and anxiety and what the Bible says about it.
Let's start off by let's assume that panic is part of the idea of anxiety. And so when I talk about anxiety today, let's assume I'm also talking about panic. So I don't want to deal with those as two different subjects, but let's just put them under the one umbrella of anxiety. And that will make this question a bit more easier to ask. And it is a great question. In my counselling and in my dealings with people, anxiety is one of the common things that I come against, deal with, yeah.
But isn't it a normal part of life?
Anxiety is extraordinarily a normal part of life. In fact, it's a very healthy part of life. Anxiety is a human response to trouble and danger. It's a human response to uncertainty. It's definitely a human response to fear. And so it's extraordinarily normal, and we do need anxiety to have a healthy part of our lives, to have a part in our lives. And so the idea of eliminating anxiety is dangerous, and it's also silly. We must see anxiety as both a positive and a negative. If it's helping you to stay safe, helping you to make decisions, and helping you to be wise, then anxiety is a good thing. But of course, there is a type of anxiety which is extraordinarily disempowering.
So it's very much like salt in your diet.
Yes, that's right. You need a little bit, but too much will kill you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good way of viewing it. Yeah, that's right.
And so what about, back to the salt analogy again, when you get so much that it actually becomes negative and affects the way you function?
People that endure constant anxiety. Now, when I was looking at this, what do they define constant anxiety? If someone's had 6 months where they're daily experiencing the same type of angst, same type of anxiety, of distress, maybe someone who's constantly distressed or anxious every day about going to work, and that's now become a pattern over 6 months, they tend to suggest that that is a medical condition. That's become no longer a normal form of anxiety, but rather a mental health issue. When you're exposed to long-term anxiety, you're exposed to long-term adrenaline and negative chemical reactions. You're also exposed to pattern behaviour. And so what happens is that anxiety becomes hardwired into every part of your functionality, every part of your life. So it becomes debilitating. It becomes literally to a point that you simply cannot function well in normal life doing.
So what personal experiences do you have with anxiety?
Well, in my life, anxiety has played a reasonably significant part in who I am. I do have depression. I struggle with depression, and part of depression is always anxiety. And so depression has been a part of my life since I was a kid, since I was a young person. My first experience of anxiety would have been at high school, where it became more obvious. I remember several times at high school sneaking home to get dressed or changed because my shirt and my clothes were wet with sweat. And I couldn't work out why I was always sweating, and why when I arrived at school I always felt overwhelmed. That was my first, I suppose, obvious encounter with anxiety. I've experienced anxiety in different ways because I was a slight autism about me. I have a problem with environments, so my wife Tanya is very familiar with my anxiety in places like the warehouse. Sometimes I can go to the warehouse and do my shopping and there's no issue. Sometimes the lights and the sounds and the movement trigger an anxiety in me, and I start hyperventilating and I start clenching my fists, and Tanya tells me, you need to get out because you're basically being over anxious. And so I suppose in those senses I'm very aware of anxiety as a normal part of who I am as a person. And it's hard work. I mean, I do a lot of, obviously, teaching, but I've never ever got to the point where I don't have some sort of anxiety before I do it. Even this sort of thing creates an anxiety for me.
Yeah.
So it's a part of who I am.
Mm. Yeah. So what would be one of your experiences specifically with panic attacks?
Oh, panic attacks are the worst. Anxiety is normal to all of us, but not everyone gets to the point of panic attacks, or most people might experience a small amount of it, but when panic attacks get very bad, they're extraordinarily difficult to deal with. One of those incidences occurred many years ago when I was driving down to work, and I wasn't well at this stage, and I parked outside the back of the shop that I was managing and literally I couldn't let go of the steering wheel. My hand locked, and I was terrified. Every time I looked at the back door thinking I need to go in there, my heart rate went up, I started to hyperventilate, and literally I just, obviously in my head I did not want to get out of the car. And that was amusing on hindsight, but in that moment it was terrifying. And I remember driving home very upset that I couldn't overcome that sense of panic. And so that would be one of my intense panic attacks that I had.
Wow. So how do you cope with it?
How do you cope with it? Well, you certainly have to learn. For some people like myself, we have to learn to live with it. For other people, they can process and progress through it. One of the issues with anxiety for most people, not everyone, but is the sense that they need to control everything. Yep. And I think the problem is with a lot of people with anxiety is that they feel out of control, and there's this subliminal desire within inside of us to take the circumstances and try and control them, but we can't. And so the sense of being overwhelmed because you can't control everything eventually just floods us. So I think one of the first things that I've learned to do, and I've got a lot better at it, is accept I can't control things. Bad things happen, and we have to accept that as part of our realism. We've just got to come to terms with bad things happen. And come to terms with that it's going to be okay. Everything will pass. Everything will stop. You know, a bad situation will stop. Just like, unfortunately, good situations stop, so will bad situations stop. So you've got to hold the course until the bad situation stops. And that's terrifying, especially if you've been in some sort of crisis or trauma that marks your soul. The actual belief that this will pass, you lose perspective. But you have to believe it'll pass. The panic attack will pass. The moment you're in will pass. The pain you're feeling will pass. You just have to hold your course. And also, I think you have to just give up the demand to make everything the way you want it to be. Not so much just a control factor. You literally have to accept that things aren't always going to be the way you want them to be, and that's going to be fine. A good piece of art tends to have a little bit of chaos in it. Colour, variance, shade, darkness, brightness. So life is like an artistry thing, and what makes life beautiful is both the splendour and the depth. And so I think that's part of it. Also, we have to accept that in the Bible, it's part of the story of Christians and of saints. I was reading Psalm 59, and David, here you got King David, and he's in a terrible situation. And hear these words: "Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Be my fortress against those who are attacking me. Deliver me from evildoers, and save me from those who are after my blood. See how they lie in wait for me, fiercely, and conspire against me, for no offence of sin or sin of mine, Lord. I have done no wrong, yet they are ready to attack me. Arise to help me, Lord. Look on my plight. You, Lord, O God Almighty, you who are the God of Israel, rouse yourself to punish all the nations. Show no mercy to the wicked traitors." I mean, if that doesn't sound like a kind of panic, I don't know what does.
Yeah,
and so
quite extreme.
It's extreme. So it's also part of Jesus' experience. There was this moment prior to his crucifixion where he goes and prays, and Luke says in chapter 22, verse 41, that he drew aside, and anxiety, the overwhelming sense of what was before him, took hold of him, and he sweated as if it were blood. And that's a medical condition where you're actually stressed so much, you're in so much anxiety about what's about to happen, that your capillaries open and you, according to what I read, you literally, your sweat and blood mix together. So even our Lord experienced anxiety. And so the three biblical principles that I live with, based on the fact that anxiety is part of life, anxiety is part of our experience, and anxiety is part of the story of the Bible, is that, well, first thing's the most obvious. We don't live in utopia. Have you noticed that?
I thought something was going on, yeah.
We're not in utopia. We're not in the kingdom of God. And we have to come to terms with the fact that here and now, we live in a broken, messed up world. And once you give up the demand for utopia and get a realistic attitude, I think you can cope better. The second principle I work with, eventually God will deliver us. Whether it's on this side of the grave or the other, we are delivered. Yeah. And there's that trust and faith that ultimately God's purposes are greater than our struggle. And I hold on to who God is. And finally, our role is to trust and just live our lives. Not to demand that we are in control, not to pretend that we're some sort of small God who has the right to force people to behave like we want them to, or force circumstances to be the way we want them to be. We just can't, we're not God. And we've got no right to demand that we can create the world that we want. And so we have to give people the freedom to be a mess. We have to give the world the freedom to be a mess. We have to give circumstances the freedom to be messy. And I think that will help, because then you stop demanding the impossible.
So that would also have quite a lot to do, though, with who you actually spend your time with.
Much so.
Yeah.
I'm probably really hard on this one, and especially due to what's happened the last few years with me. You are who you hang with. And look, if you are hanging with if you're dealing with people, friends, and that are always high on anxiety, they'll affect you. If you're dealing with friends who are always trying to demand control, it'll affect you. If you were dealing with immature Christians who put guilt on you because you're not getting over what they perceive as your weakness and your sin, you probably need to move away from that. Who you are will certainly have been defined to a reasonable degree by who you're hanging with. So yeah, most definitely.
So it's pretty safe to say then that very few people are actually their own person.
Well, that's a fair call. We are, certainly I am who I am, but I am also the consequences of those influences about me. And so, yes, you're right. Everything is a domino effect, and everything has unintended consequences. Hang around good, healthy, wise people who will challenge you. You'll tend to have a better chance in becoming wise, mature, and sensible yourself. Hang around idiots, well,
you become an idiot.
Yeah, it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
So here goes my conclusion on it. Anxiety is a normal part of human experience. It is not something to run from, but work through. It is important to know that if you live with it long enough and you're constantly experiencing anxiety that's influencing and in a negative way your day-to-day living, your relationships and your friendships and your work environment and your eating and sleeping, if you go for, say, 3 to 5, maybe 6 months with it, you really probably need to get medical help. You should go see your doctor. You may need to get a counsellor involved. And look, there's something else to keep in mind. Sometimes you don't need a counsellor. You need someone who we'll call a life skill or a mentor. Someone who can teach you life skills or mentor you. And so I think that's important. You have to face your fears, because the more you run from them, the more they control you.
Absolutely.
One of the things I did when I lost my position at RBC was, for the first 3 or 4 months, as I went and visited Rotorua Baptist Church, so that I could get used to the fact that it had happened. And so I would go visit, I would say hello to people there, I would talk to the new pastor, I would walk through the hall, and one stage I remember standing just outside the door and looking into where I used to do the preaching and teaching, and just saying to myself, this moment has passed, it's okay, you will survive this. And so I have this great belief that you face your fears. Get used to your own mortality. A lot of our anxiety is around death. But death and dying is a normal part of life. Death shouldn't define your fears. Death should define your celebrations. And so dying's not a problem. I think death is fine. Living badly is a problem. And I've got the saying that there are a lot of dead people living and breathing because they have stopped living well. And so come to terms with your own mortality, come to terms with the fact that everyone you love is going to die, just come to terms that everything's dying, and accept that that's part of normal life. If you can come to terms with mortality, death and dying, and see it as part of the overall plan of God and part of the normal state of living, I think that deals a lot with anxiety as well. Avoid cheap Christianity.
Yep.
Run from those Christians who simply think that they can pray for you and you should be instantly healed, because they're going to put guilt on you, they're going to put shame on you, and they're going to create more anxiety. Run from it. Cheap Christianity is a disease of our modern age. Run from it. It's not fear that people judge you because of your anxiety and their perceived hyper-spirituality or their mystical faith. We live in a fallen world. It's normal to feel and experience the fallenness around us. And so I have great belief that if you go to a church or a fellowship, or you're dealing with a minister or Bible study teacher who reduces that anxiety down to some sort of formula, do this, A plus B equals C, you probably are in the wrong environment. Get prayer and support from a mature, wise Christian friend. Go to mature, wise Christians. We don't do that enough. Those who wear their stripes well in life with dignity and resilience are the right people to talk to. Don't talk to people who don't understand. Find the person who's got the stripes on their back and who wear their stripes with dignity and maturity. That's the Christian you should be talking to. Learn to enjoy the good moments that you have. You know, there is good moments in life. Wonderful, wonderful moments. Grab hold of them, remember them. Take mental pictures of a good moment so that when the darkness comes upon you, you can project the light through to it, the moments that are good. I love that. I've learned this habit over years of I stop and I look and I stare at something and say, this is a good moment. And I try to capture that moment. And so when things get really bad for me, I try to remember a good moment, and that helps. And finally, eat well, sleep well, walk, get exercise, burn it off, and love well, and have some really good fun on the way. Learn to have fun. Go do something different. If you're married with a partner, make love well. If you don't have that, go have fun. Go bike. Go on an adventure. Read a book. Do something that reminds you that you're alive. And those are my conclusions on it. We can't run away and pretend anxiety doesn't exist, but nor should we run from it. We need to find a healthier way with dealing with the fact that we live in a broken world. So what's your thinking after all this sharing?
It's a lot to process, to be honest.
Luckily we were recording it.
Yeah, exactly.
you can watch a couple of times.
Yeah.
Do you endure anxiety?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I experienced it to a large degree, but yeah, I've certainly had moments, and yeah.
So from what I've said, what would you incorporate into your life?
I think probably one of the biggest things for me is knowing that every moment passes.
Yeah. Every moment passes.
Yeah.
That includes the bad moment. It too shall pass. Well, thank you for that question. I hope that our sharing today and some of the words I've given you and some of the advice I've given you is useful. Just keep on living. Enjoy those moments. Enjoy the friendships and the family you've got around you. And if necessary, change your environment. Have the guts to not run away from your anxiety, but run towards what's necessary to change those things in your life that keep you stuck there. God bless you, and I hope this has been useful to you. Have a great day. God bless.